Let's talk about a skill that's at the heart of literally all learning, but when we kind of take for granted, academic listening. And no, it's not just about hearing sounds, it's about deep, active understanding. So let's break down how it really works. You know the feeling, right? You're in a lecture, the professor is talking a mile a minute, and you can hear every single word clearly. But when you try to actually grab onto the main point, it just evaporates. If you've been there, trust me, you are not alone. That right there is the core challenge of academic listening. I love this quote because it just nails it. Listening isn't passive, not at all. Your brain is performing what researchers call a massive data crunch. Think about that. It's like a high-speed mental workout where you're constantly sifting through information, spotting patterns, and connecting the dots to build meaning in real time. So let's really dig into that challenge. What is it about sitting in a classroom or a lecture hall that makes it so much harder than just having a chat with a friend? Well, the biggest hurdle is just the sheer cognitive load. I mean, it's relentless. It's all happening live, with no pause, no rewind button. And for students who are listening in a second language, wow, it's even more intense. You're trying to decode unfamiliar sounds and words while also trying to understand these big, complex ideas. It's a huge mental juggling act. But here's the thing, academic listening isn't just one skill. The rules of the game totally change depending on the setting. So let's look at the three main arenas where you'll be putting these skills to the test. First up, you've got the classic lecture. This is mostly one-way traffic, right? The professor talks, you listen. The main challenge here is just pure stamina and concentration. Then you have seminars, and this is a whole different ballgame. It's a two-way street, so you have to understand what's being said fast enough to jump in and contribute. And finally, there are those one-on-one meetings, maybe with a tutor or professor. Here, it's all about that back and forth, that active engagement, and reading all those little social cues. Totally different strategies for each one. Okay, so how on earth does our brain manage to pull off this massive data crunch without short-circuiting? Well, it turns out we have this really cool two-part strategy for making sense of that constant stream of sound. On one side, we have what's called top-down processing. The best way to think about this is like using a map. You're using the big picture, what you already know about the topic, the context, to guess and predict where the speaker is going. On the other side, you've got bottom-up processing. This is more like building with Lego bricks. It's the nitty-gritty work of decoding individual sounds into words and words into sentences to build the meaning from scratch. Now, here's the secret. The best listeners don't just pick one and stick with it. It's all about blending them. They're constantly, and probably without even realizing it, weaving between the two. They use that big picture context to make sense of the little details, and then they use those little details to update their map of the big picture. It's this beautiful, dynamic dance happening inside your head. Okay, so we get the challenge, we get the mental processes, but how do we actually improve? Let's talk about probably the single most powerful tool you have for flipping the switch from passive hearing to active listening: taking notes. And note-taking is so much more than just, scribbling on a page. It's actually a pretty complex four-step process. First, obviously, you listen, but then you have to actually comprehend it to make sense of it. Then comes the really hard part. You have to select what's important enough to write down. And only after all that do you actually write. That whole process forces you to be an active learner, not a passive sponge. And because of that process, note-taking has two legit superpowers. The first is called the encoding effect. Just the physical act of summarizing and writing something down helps sear it into your memory more deeply. The second is the external storage effect, which is the one we all know and love. Your notes become a physical backup drive for your brain, something you can go back and study long after the actual memory of the lecture starts to fade. So note-taking is a game changer for sure. But what about training our brains even before we pick up a pen? How can we get better at the fundamental listening part? Let's talk about some practical ways you can train your academic ear. So, what the research tells us is that you should practice with authentic stuff. Think TED Talks or those free online courses from universities, often called MOOCs. And when you listen, don't just zero in on the interesting facts. Try to listen for the overall structure. Is the speaker comparing two things? Are they telling a story in order? Figuring that out helps you fire up that top-down, big-picture processing we talked about earlier. A huge part of this is learning to hear what's called signposting. These are the little verbal breadcrumbs that speakers leave to guide you. When you hear phrases like, "now let's move on to," or "the crucial point is this," or "in contrast," those are basically road signs telling you a turn is coming. Once you start recognizing them, you can follow the speaker's logic so much more easily.
Which really leaves us with one final thought to chew on. We live in this age of constant information, right? We're just swimming in text and videos and posts. But maybe, just maybe, the ability to truly, deeply listen, to process, understand, and connect with ideas as they happen is the most important and maybe the most undervalued skill we can possibly build. What do you think?